I was told we're going to have the Army come here and sandbag the house. That's good. Let's see what happens.
The military has arrived in Ottawa to help with the flooding emergency. City officials now say water levels could peak half a meter above what they had seen in the flooding 2 years ago. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to CBC News Network tonight. I'm Natasha Fatha. We begin with historic flooding across eastern Canada. States of emergency have been declared in cities in Ontario, Quebec, and New Brunswick. Montreal is the latest to join the list.
We're looking at the situation minute by minute, hour by hour, and if there's an evacuation that is needed, then we will be doing it. People need to understand that this is serious and this is dangerous. And right now, the threats are serious. They're concrete.
At least 12 homes have been placed on mandatory evacuation order in Montreal's West Island. Meanwhile, the town of Lachute, west of Montreal, is completely surrounded by water. Further north from there, officials are closely watching a hydroelectric dam. Now, if that dam fails, properties downriver would be threatened. Nearly 400 members of the Canadian Armed Forces have been brought in to assist with sandbagging efforts in the Ottawa region. Water levels along the Ottawa River continue to rise, and up to 35 millimeters of rain could fall by tomorrow. In New Brunswick, water levels are dropping in some of the areas, but it will be days before floodwaters recede. More than 100 roads have been impacted across the province, and many of them have had to close. Public Safety Minister Ralph Goodale gave a flood update today and said there's a reason we're seeing more severe weather events like this.
These wild cycles from storms and floods to droughts and wildfires, that is a very serious national problem. It is a public safety problem. And we all have to work conscientiously together to do two things. As much as we humanly can to slow down and mitigate the consequences of climate change, and then to put in place the adaptations that will put us in a stronger position to be more resilient and more able to withstand the consequences and deal with the consequences.
With significant rainfall in the forecast, flooding is now expected to exceed levels seen during the devastating floods that hit the region 2 years ago. CBC's Hannah Thibodeau is in Constance Bay, which is northwest of Ottawa, with more on how the region is getting ready for another soggy weekend.
You can see that the military has arrived. They just got here not long ago, and as soon as they did, you can see them all behind me. There are about 400 who are on the ground in Constance Bay right now. They're helping direct traffic. They're filling sandbags with volunteers behind me. You even have kids who have come out of school for the day to help sandbag here. So I just want to ask, you're Valerie.
Yes,
you came here a bit earlier in the morning to bag sandbags. Tell me why you came down. You're not even from the area.
No, just to help our community. We're all in this together. It's important to help each other and teach our kids that we have to stick together.
Thanks, Valerie. So if we walk around this way, there are trucks, and these are people who are helping their neighbors, or they are people who actually need sandbags themselves. So there's this long line of trucks. They come up, they load up the sandbags so that they can bring them to their house and put them around the base of their homes. How many bags have you stacked in front of yours?
Honestly, I can't even tell you. There's hundreds. I know a lot of people have it a lot worse than us, though, so it's those people you want to really help right now.
And with the weather expected to remain just like this all weekend, hundreds of volunteers, as well as the military, are expected to be out all through the weekend. Hannah Thibodeau, CBC News, Constance Bay.
Last hour, I spoke with Lieutenant Colonel Aaron Williams. He's on the ground with the Armed Forces tonight in Ottawa. I began by asking him what the immediate responsibilities of the Armed Forces are in the affected areas.
That looks like, in practical terms, soldiers getting out and conducting assessments of the identified areas, and then working to do the labor behind filling and deploying sandbags to those areas which are in greatest need.
For those of us who are not in any of the flood-prone areas, we're just seeing it in the news, we're seeing pictures. Can you describe for me what this experience is like? How difficult, how challenging is this?
Well, it is certainly challenging in and of the work itself. It's challenging in that we are proud to be here alongside Canadians. It's not a position we want to see Canadians in. We know it's a very emotional time for them, especially when they see the water lapping right at their property line. But it certainly gives us a certain amount of pride to know that we can work shoulder to shoulder with them. And I would characterize it as, at that point, just Canadians working together. And some of us are wearing a uniform and others are members of the community, all working together to do as much as we can in those locations to preserve property and really people's dreams.
Sir, you mentioned the fact that people are getting emotional. Talk to me a bit about that. What are people telling you? What are their concerns?
Well, first and foremost, they're very glad we're there. It's reassuring for them to see us there, and they've said that openly. Certainly, they're concerned. Weather is an unpredictable thing, and so they know that just as quickly as this has come, it could cease. They also know it could get a lot worse very quickly. So it's the uncertainty around it that probably bothers them the most. And I'm very proud of the fact that our soldiers provide some reassurance in that situation.
We know what the potential dangers would be to people's property, to their homes and all of that, but give us a sense of what the physical dangers might be in a situation like this.
Well, we will be constantly reassessing and continuing to assess road conditions as roads become flooded over. Are they traversable for our vehicles? Should we be walking across properties? What are the underwater hazards that may not have previously been identified? The city is obviously working to understand when and where they need to shut off power, gas, other utilities to ensure that citizens and military personnel are safe in the areas they're working.
Now, in a situation where people might have to leave their home, but they're reluctant to do so, are you getting any pushback? Is there any sort of reluctance on that front?
So certainly that is a City of Ottawa lead, and they've spoken this evening about asking for voluntary evacuation. They would, if required, step that up to door knocks using police and fire officials. We would assist down the track, but the immediate response would obviously be from emergency management officials from the city.
Have you seen any resistance on that front?
People are very agreeable. You can imagine being in your own home, and it's a tough thing to recognize that decision point when you have to say it's time to go. People want to do as much as they can as long as they can, and that's when the cooler heads of the city officials need to weigh in and suggest when perhaps they're at most risk and it's time to move on.
When you're confronted with someone who might be a little bit reluctant or a little afraid or, as you said, emotional, what do you say to them?
First and foremost, demonstrate empathy and true compassion, and that's what you're seeing out of our soldiers. They're genuinely pleased to be here. They share the concerns of the citizens, and in working so hard to protect properties, they become somewhat invested themselves in the desire of a positive outcome.
So in the days ahead, we're still expecting more rain, we're expecting more flooding. What are going to be some of the biggest challenges for you looking forward?
Well, we are working very hard with the city to understand what's coming. They have a good amount of predictive water modeling as well. They're relying on Environment Canada and other assets to do weather assessments. We will continue to send reconnaissance groups out to have a look at all of the sites that they think may be at risk, and we'll continue to prioritize and reprioritize where we could best make efficient use of our soldiers so that we can provide the greatest effect across the city.
Now, I know in your position, you're doing what is being asked of you as a member of the military, but for the rest of us across Canada, if we'd like to help, if we'd like to support, what would you recommend we do?
I would recommend you contact Ottawa Emergency Services and the Ottawa Emergency Planning Center. Many folks around the table today when I've attended their meetings, as well as a large number of non-governmental charity organizations who are looking to coordinate efforts in that regard.
Okay, good advice. Thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thanks. Have a great evening.
You too. That was Lieutenant Colonel Aaron Williams. He's with the Canadian Armed Forces, and he joined us earlier from Ottawa. Well, turning to Quebec now, where the City of Montreal has declared a state of emergency due to the threat of flooding in several areas. Now, that order gives the city power to seize land and install flood prevention measures and force evacuations. So far, a dozen homes have been identified as needing to be evacuated immediately. The CBC's Anthony Nerestant has more from Montreal.
So Montreal has declared a state of emergency, but it's important to note that it's not just for the city of Montreal, it's also for the entire island of Montreal. And the reason for that, it'll allow different municipalities to pool their resources together, whether it's firefighters, police, or other emergency workers, to make sure they can send whatever help is needed in the areas that are most affected. And for now, there are only about 12 homes on the west island or the west end of the city of Montreal that appear to need to be evacuated as soon as possible, but that number could grow. Off island, I'm in Vaudreuil-Dorion right now, and officials here are not just dealing with the risk of flooding for homes, they're also dealing with the Trans-Canadian Highway 40 here, and what they're doing is they're installing concrete slabs like these ones all along this stretch of road, about 2 kilometers long, and the goal is to keep the floodwaters from the nearby lake at bay, and this work will continue well into the morning. They're doing the work right now on the other side of the highway. This is as close as we can get for now, and that work will continue until tomorrow morning, and as a result will reduce the traffic here from 3 lanes down to 1. And let's not disregard that this is a stretch of road that is really important when it comes to commercial transport between the province of Quebec and the province of Ontario, and officials here in Vaudreuil-Dorion are hoping that this work will be done as soon as possible and that they can keep the floodwaters away from the highway. Anthony Nerestan, CBC News, Vaudreuil-Dorion.
And we received an update on the situation in New Brunswick earlier this afternoon. Officials there say the water levels on the St. John River have stabilized in Fredericton. They are still rising further downstream, however, but it is very slowly. The river could remain at the flood stage for many more days, and officials are warning that the flood risk remains high. Shane Fowler has more for us from Fredericton.
Well, Natasha, it's basically the same no matter where you go in this province. There are a ton of people scrambling to protect their homes, clean up their properties, and just a lot of people really working hard right now. But there's also a lot of people who are working hard to help their neighbors who are less than fortunate right now. When the waters of the Narrapis River shot up suddenly this week, it overtook entire neighborhoods, flooded up to the shingles. In some places, the waters have become a hazardous headache for even the simplest tasks, like getting groceries. When Patricia Moulton needs her food for her family and pets, she relies on her neighbor, Ray Burry. He's been ferrying people back and forth to the cut-off community of Sunset Valley in Narrapis with his Zodiac. We tagged along for the 10-minute boat ride just to get into the neighborhood.
My son goes to school in the morning, and yesterday it was snowing. And
Wait, your son goes through this trek twice a day just to get to school?
He does. Yes, he does. He's pretty devoted to his school. So.
Moulton says her family has little choice but to stay and fight the rising waters. They thought the worst was over when those waters came up last year and swallowed their home. Forced out for 4 months, they spent around $110,000 repairing their home and raising it by 4 feet. Despite all that work, she says they're living the same nightmare they did 1 year ago.
It makes me feel sad. And discouraged.
While the Moulton family has decided to stay in their home, the Canadian Red Cross says the number of people evacuated is still rising.
So as of this morning, we have 372 households, which translates to 940 individuals.
Moulton says some of the families have left altogether, calling it quits after last year's flood and taking a buyout offered by the New Brunswick government. She says she misses her neighbors, but as long as she still has some like Burry to help out, her family will continue to fight this flood. Now, in talking with the Red Cross, they say that there's about 70% of the people who have registered as being evacuated right now that were the same people who were registered for evacuation last year. And talking with the families that we were with earlier today, they tell us that what they're looking forward to the most right now is hearing from EMO and from the provincial government about the details of a buyout plan, because they say they simply cannot do this for a 3rd year in a row. And just getting through this year has been incredibly tough on those families.
The CBC's Shane Fowler reporting from Fredericton.